My name is Madison, and I am 28 years old. What I discovered when my mother returned from Europe 17 years ago changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. She left me with $2 and a refrigerator full of rotting food when I was just 11, claiming it was a business trip. But the truth about where she really went and what she did there would eventually destroy our entire family dynamic. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones planning your downfall from the very beginning. Before we dive into this family revenge story that will leave you questioning everything about blood relations, let me ask, where are you watching from today? If you have ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, go ahead and hit that like button, because this story is going to take you on an emotional roller coaster. Make sure to subscribe for more real-life drama stories, and trust me, you will want to stick around until the very end because the justice served in this tale is absolutely satisfying. The summer I turned 11, everything in my world shifted permanently. My mother, Patricia, announced over breakfast that she would be traveling to Europe for a month on business. She worked in marketing for a pharmaceutical company, so international trips were not entirely unusual. What was unusual was leaving me, an 11-year-old, essentially alone for 4 weeks. She handed me 2 crumpled dollar bills and pointed to the refrigerator. "There is enough food to last you," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Mrs. Henderson next door has my contact information if there is an emergency." Mrs. Henderson was 73 and could barely hear her television at full volume. The first week passed in a blur of confusion and hunger. The milk spoiled on day 3. The bread grew mold by day 5. I stretched those $2 as far as possible buying a pack of crackers from the corner store. When that ran out, I started eating ketchup packets I had saved from school lunches. By week 2, I was surviving on whatever free samples the grocery store offered and water from the kitchen tap. I lost weight rapidly, my clothes hanging loose on my shrinking frame. I told myself this was normal, that mothers left their children to fend for themselves all the time. I convinced myself I was being dramatic. Mrs. Henderson never checked on me. I later realized my mother had never actually given her any contact information. When I returned to school after those 4 weeks, my teacher, Miss Rodriguez, immediately noticed my appearance. I had dark circles under my eyes. My clothes were dirty because I could not figure out how to work the washing machine properly, and I had lost so much weight that my pants kept falling down. "Madison, sweetheart, are you feeling all right?" she asked during recess, pulling me aside. I nodded quickly, not trusting my voice. I had become skilled at lying by then. But Miss Rodriguez was persistent. She asked about my mother, about our home situation. I gave vague answers about business trips and family friends checking in. She did not look convinced, but she let it go that day. My mother returned exactly 4 weeks later, tanned and relaxed, carrying shopping bags from expensive European stores. She breezed through the door as if nothing had happened, as if she had not abandoned her 11-year-old daughter with $2 and rotting food. "Did you miss me, honey?" she asked, barely glancing in my direction as she unpacked silk scarves and designer perfume. I stared at her, this woman who was supposed to be my protector, my safe harbor. "I was hungry," I whispered. She waved her hand dismissively. "You are being dramatic. There was plenty of food in this house." That was the moment I realized my mother was not just neglectful. She was deliberately cruel. No adult accidentally leaves a child with $2 for a month. No adult forgets to arrange proper supervision. This had been intentional. Over the following weeks, I started paying attention to things I had previously overlooked. Phone calls that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. Credit card statements left carelessly on the kitchen counter showing charges from expensive restaurants and luxury hotels. Not business expenses. Designer clothes appearing in her closet that seemed far beyond what a pharmaceutical marketing employee could afford. The most damaging discovery came 3 months later, when I was looking for school supplies in her home office. Hidden beneath a stack of seemingly innocent paperwork, I found a folder marked "Personal" in her handwriting. Inside were bank statements showing deposits of thousands of dollars from accounts I did not recognize. There were photographs of my mother with a man I had never seen before. A distinguished-looking older gentleman with silver hair and expensive suits. They were not business photos. These were intimate pictures of two people clearly involved in a romantic relationship. But the most shocking document was a handwritten letter from this mystery man dated during the exact month she had been in Europe for business. The letter was passionate, discussing their future together, their plans to leave their respective spouses and start fresh somewhere new. It mentioned how patient he was being while she handled the situation with her daughter. I was not her daughter in this letter. I was a situation to be handled. The final piece of evidence was a real estate listing for a house in Switzerland with both their names listed as potential buyers. They were planning to disappear together to start a new life in another country. The timeline in the letter made it clear that this European trip had been a test run, a way to see how long they could abandon their responsibilities without consequences. My mother had left me to starve while she played house with her lover in Swiss chalets and Parisian cafes. She had been planning to abandon me permanently. I was 11 years old, sitting on my bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of my mother's betrayal, and I felt something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. It was not just hurt or abandonment. It was a calculating anger that felt far older than my years. I carefully photographed every document with the small digital camera I had received for my birthday. I returned everything to exactly where I had found it. My mother never suspected that her 11-year-old daughter had uncovered her elaborate deception. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind working through possibilities and consequences. I was too young to understand complex legal implications, but I understood betrayal. I understood that adults who were supposed to protect children sometimes planned to harm them instead. I also understood that knowledge was power, and I now held dangerous knowledge about my mother's secret life. The question was what to do with that power. The months following my discovery transformed me in ways that probably should have worried any adult paying attention. Unfortunately, no adults were paying attention. I became calculating in a way that felt both foreign and natural, as if my mother's abandonment had awakened something dormant in my personality. I started documenting everything. Every late-night phone call my mother thought I could not hear. Every expensive purchase that appeared without explanation. Every time she claimed to be working late, but came home smelling like cologne that was not sold in any store I had ever been to. My mother began taking more frequent trips, each lasting longer than the previous one. She had become bolder after the success of her month-long European adventure. 2 weeks in California for a conference. 3 weeks in Florida for client meetings. Each time she left me with slightly more money, $5 instead of $2, as if increasing the paltry amount somehow made the abandonment acceptable. But I was learning to survive her absences. I had figured out which neighbors threw away perfectly good food, which restaurants gave samples to children who looked hungry enough, which teachers might slip me granola bars if I lingered after class looking tired. More importantly, I was learning about her patterns. During her second California trip, I discovered she had been corresponding with the same silver-haired man through a post office box she thought I did not know about. I followed her there one Saturday morning, watching from behind a parked car as she retrieved a thick envelope and read its contents with the kind of smile she had never given me. The man's name was Richard Montague, and he was married to a woman named Catherine, who had 3 children from her previous marriage. Through careful internet research at the public library, because my mother monitored our home computer usage, I learned that Richard owned several successful tech companies and was worth approximately $15 million. His wife Catherine had been fighting cancer for 2 years. The online society pages showed photos of fundraising galas where Richard appeared dutiful and caring, always by his ailing wife's side, while my mother lurked in the background at company events playing the role of innocent employee. My 11-year-old mind started connecting dots that would have impressed adult investigators. Richard was not just having an affair with my mother. He was planning to abandon his dying wife and her children to start fresh with someone new. My mother was not just a neglectful parent. She was a predator targeting a vulnerable family during their most difficult time. But there was more. During one of my careful searches through her belongings, I found correspondence with a lawyer discussing something called life insurance beneficiaries and accidental death policies. The language was complex, but certain phrases stood out even to my young understanding: policy modifications, recent changes, and substantial payout upon confirmation. My mother had taken out a life insurance policy on me, a significant one. The realization hit me like physical pain. She was not just planning to abandon me, she was planning something far worse. Those increasingly longer trips were not just romantic getaways. They were rehearsals for permanent disappearance, but first she needed to ensure I could not follow her or cause problems for her new life. I spent weeks in a strange state of emotional detachment, observing my mother as if she were a specimen in a science experiment rather than the woman who had given birth to me. She moved through our house like a stranger, touching nothing that belonged to me, avoiding extended conversations, treating me like an inconvenient roommate rather than her daughter. During this time, I made a decision that probably saved my life. I started creating insurance policies of my own. I wrote detailed letters describing my mother's abandonment, her secret relationship, and my concerns about the life insurance policy. I sealed these letters in envelopes addressed to my school principal, Miss Rodriguez, and the local police department. I hid copies in 3 different locations: my school locker, the public library inside a book I had carefully selected, and with Mrs. Chen, who ran the corner market and had always been kind to me. I instructed Mrs. Chen that if anything happened to me, if I went missing, if I was hurt, if my mother claimed I had run away, she should immediately open the envelope and contact the authorities. Mrs. Chen took this request seriously, perhaps sensing something in my demeanor that adults often missed. I also began building relationships with adults outside my mother's influence. I volunteered to help Miss Rodriguez after school, creating a reliable presence in her daily routine. I started regular conversations with the school nurse about general health topics, establishing myself as a responsible student who checked in frequently. Most importantly, I began carefully documenting my mother's behavior in ways that would be impossible for her to explain away. I recorded phone conversations using an old cassette recorder I found in our basement. I photographed documents and stored the images in multiple locations. I kept detailed journals of her comings and goings written in a code I had developed based on books from the library. By my 12th birthday, I had assembled a comprehensive case file that would have impressed professional investigators. I understood that my mother was planning something final and irreversible. I also understood that traditional channels for help, calling police, telling teachers, reaching out to relatives, might not work fast enough if she accelerated her timeline. The breakthrough came during what would be her final business trip. She announced she would be gone for 6 weeks longer than any previous absence. This time, she left me with $20 and a refrigerator stocked with food that would last exactly 1 week. "I will be very difficult to reach," she told me, not bothering to maintain eye contact. "You are old enough now to handle things on your own." I nodded obediently, but inside, every alarm bell was ringing. 6 weeks was not a business trip. 6 weeks was a trial run for permanent abandonment, and the deliberately insufficient supplies suggested she was not planning for me to survive the full duration. That night, I implemented the plan I had been developing for months. The morning after my mother's departure for her 6-week trip, I walked into Miss Rodriguez's classroom before school started and placed one of my carefully prepared envelopes on her desk. "Miss Rodriguez, I need to talk to someone about my home situation," I said quietly. "But first, I need you to read this." She opened the envelope immediately, her expression shifting from mild concern to alarm as she read my detailed account of the past year. The abandonment, the mysterious man, the life insurance policy. the pattern of increasingly dangerous neglect. "Madison, honey, how long has this been happening?" she asked, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Since I was 11. It is getting worse." Miss Rodriguez made several phone calls that morning. By afternoon, I was sitting in the office of Detective Maria Santos, a woman whose calm competence immediately put me at ease. Detective Santos was different from other adults who had dismissed my concerns as childhood drama. She listened to my entire story without interruption, taking notes and asking specific questions that showed she understood the seriousness of what I was describing. "You mentioned recordings and photographs," Detective Santos said. "How much evidence do we have?" I pulled out a folder I had prepared containing copies of bank statements, photographs, recorded phone conversations, and my detailed timeline of events. Detective Santos examined each item carefully, her expression growing more serious with each new piece of evidence. "Madison, this is incredibly thorough work. How did you manage to gather all of this?" "She does not pay attention to me unless she is angry," I explained. "It made it easy to search her things and follow her around. She thinks I am too young to understand what I am seeing." Detective Santos contacted Child Protective Services immediately. Within hours, I was placed in emergency foster care with the Martinez family, a couple who specialized in caring for children in crisis situations. For the first time in over a year, I fell asleep in a house where adults were actually watching out for my well-being. But my mother's abandonment was only the beginning of a much larger investigation. Detective Santos had contacted federal authorities about the potential insurance fraud and the international scope of my mother's activities. Within a week, they had tracked down Richard Montague and uncovered a network of financial crimes that extended far beyond simple adultery. Richard had been systematically draining his dying wife's medical trust funds to finance his relationship with my mother. He had also taken out unauthorized loans against his wife's property, forged her signature on legal documents transferring assets, and manipulated her medication to accelerate her decline while making it appear natural. My mother was not just his accomplice. She was his teacher. Detective Santos discovered that my mother had previous relationships with two other married men, both of whom had experienced mysterious financial losses and family tragedies shortly after becoming involved with her. One man's wife had died in what was ruled an accidental fall downstairs. Another man's autistic son had disappeared during a family camping trip that my mother had suggested. "Your mother is what we call a black widow," Detective Santos explained to me during one of our meetings. "She targets vulnerable families, manipulates the men into betraying their families, and then helps eliminate anyone who might interfere with their new life together." The life insurance policy she had taken out on me was just the latest in a pattern of preparing to eliminate inconvenient family members. If I had not discovered her plans and built my evidence file, I would have become another victim in her long history of calculated murders disguised as accidents. Meanwhile, the investigation into Richard Montague revealed that his wife Catherine was much sicker than anyone realized, but not from cancer. She was being slowly poisoned with medications that mimicked cancer symptoms, while actually causing organ failure. My mother had been coaching Richard through this process during their European trips, teaching him how to administer the drugs and document fake symptoms to maintain the cancer diagnosis. Catherine's 3 stepchildren were also in danger. Richard and my mother had already begun researching accidents that could eliminate them before they could inherit any of Catherine's substantial personal wealth. Federal agents arrested Richard at his office on a Tuesday morning, interrupting a meeting where he was discussing plans to take Catherine to Switzerland for experimental treatment that would actually be her final trip. My mother was arrested the same day at a luxury hotel in Monaco, where she had been establishing residency under a false identity. The arrests made national news. Black widow couple targeted multiple families for murder and financial fraud. The scope of their crimes shocked even experienced investigators. But for me, the most important development was meeting Catherine Montague and her stepchildren. Catherine, despite her weakened condition, insisted on meeting the child whose bravery had saved her family. She was a remarkable woman who had continued running her charitable foundation even while being slowly murdered by her husband. Her stepchildren, David, who was 15, Sarah, who was 13, and little Emma, who was only 8, had been living in constant fear that something terrible was happening to their stepmother, but had been too young to understand what. "You saved our lives," Catherine told me during our first meeting at the hospital where she was recovering from the poison's effects. "But more than that, you saved us from becoming like them. You showed incredible courage." David, Sarah, and Emma became the siblings I had never had. We bonded over the shared experience of having our trust betrayed by adults who were supposed to protect us. But more importantly, we bonded over our determination to build something better from the wreckage of our destroyed families. Catherine's recovery was slow but steady. With the poison eliminated from her system and proper medical care, her health improved dramatically. The cancer disappeared completely once she stopped receiving the medications Richard had been giving her. During this time, the Martinez family, who had been fostering me, made an unexpected offer. They wanted to adopt me permanently. "You have become part of our family," Mrs. Martinez explained. "We would like to make it official, but only if that is what you want." For the first time since my mother had left me with $2 and a refrigerator full of rotting food, I felt safe enough to cry. Not from sadness or fear, but from relief and gratitude. The adoption process moved quickly. My mother, facing multiple federal charges including attempted murder fraud and child abandonment, had no grounds to contest the adoption. She signed away her parental rights from prison, probably hoping it would reduce her sentence. It did not. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Richard received the same sentence. Their network of previous crimes had been extensive enough to warrant the harshest possible punishment. But our story was far from over. Catherine Montague had a proposal that would change everything. Are you wondering how this family drama could possibly get more intense? The justice that is about to unfold will restore your faith in karma, but the way it happens will shock you. Stick around because the next part reveals how victims can become the architects of their own vindication. Catherine Montague's proposal came 6 months after the arrests, when she had regained enough strength to focus on something beyond her own recovery. She invited me, my adoptive family, the Martinezes, and her stepchildren to her home for what she called a family meeting about justice. The legal system has handled the criminal aspects of what Richard and Patricia did to our families. Catherine began, her voice steady despite everything she had endured. But there are other victims out there, other families who deserve to know the truth about what happened to their loved ones. She had been conducting her own investigation with the help of a private detective agency. They had uncovered evidence linking my mother and Richard to at least 7 other suspicious deaths over the past 15 years. Wives who had died in convenient accidents, children who had disappeared during family outings, business partners who had suffered fatal heart attacks just before major deals closed. The authorities are building cases, but these investigations take years. Meanwhile, the families of previous victims are still living with unanswered questions. They deserve to know that their loved ones were murdered, and they deserve to see justice served in ways that go beyond prison sentences. Catherine's plan was ambitious and completely legal. She wanted to use her resources and connections to create a foundation that would investigate suspicious deaths involving Black widow criminals, provide support for surviving family members, and most importantly, ensure that the assets stolen by people like my mother and Richard were recovered and returned to the rightful victims. Patricia and Richard stole more than lives, Catherine explained. They stole inheritances, life insurance payouts, properties, investments. Much of that money is still sitting in offshore accounts earning interest while families struggle to rebuild their lives. The foundation would hire forensic accountants, private investigators, and legal experts to track down these hidden assets and fight for their return. But Catherine had an even more personal mission in mind. She wanted me to be the face of this foundation. You were 12 years old when you saved not just your own life, but the lives of everyone in this room," Catherine said, looking directly at me. "Your courage and intelligence prevented multiple murders. But more than that, your story represents hope for other children who might be trapped in similar situations." The idea terrified and excited me in equal measure. I was only 13 now, still processing my own trauma while trying to build a normal life with my adoptive family. But the thought of helping other families find answers and justice felt like the most important work I could possibly do. My adoptive parents, Maria and Carlos Martinez, were supportive but cautious. "This is a big responsibility for someone so young," Maria said gently. "We want to make sure you are choosing this for the right reasons, not just because you feel obligated." I thought about it for weeks, talking with my therapist, discussing the implications with David, Sarah, and Emma, and carefully considering what this choice would mean for my future. Finally, I reached a decision that felt completely right. "I want to do it," I told Catherine during our next meeting. "But I have conditions." Catherine smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from her since we met. "What are your conditions?" "First, I want David, Sarah, and Emma to be involved in every major decision. They understand what it means to have your family betrayed, and their voices matter just as much as mine. Second, I want the foundation to focus on prevention as much as justice. We need to teach children how to recognize dangerous situations and how to build evidence files like I did. Third, I want my mother and Richard to know exactly what we are doing. I want them to understand that their actions created something powerful that will stop others like them." Catherine agreed to every condition. Within 6 months, the Madison Foundation for Family Justice was officially established. The irony of using my first name for an organization dedicated to stopping people like my mother was not lost on me. I was reclaiming my identity and using it as a weapon against predators who targeted families. Our first major case was investigating the death of Robert Chen's wife Linda, who had died in a suspicious car accident 3 years earlier. Robert had contacted us after reading about our foundation in the newspaper. His wife had been having an affair with her boss, and she had died just 2 weeks after confronting him about leaving her husband and children. Using the investigation techniques I had learned from Detective Santos and Catherine's private detectives, our team uncovered evidence that Linda's brakes had been tampered with. Her lover, a man named Stephen Walsh, had taken out a secret life insurance policy on Linda just months before her death. He was arrested within 30 days of our investigation's completion. But the most satisfying victory came when we turned our attention to recovering the assets my mother and Richard had stolen over the years. Forensic accountants traced money to accounts in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Luxembourg. Property purchased with stolen funds was seized and sold. Investments made with insurance payouts from murdered spouses were liquidated. In total, we recovered over $4 million that belonged to the families of their previous victims. Watching those families receive checks that would help rebuild their lives was more satisfying than any traditional revenge could have been. The foundation also implemented educational programs in schools, teaching children about recognizing dangerous adult behaviors, building evidence files, and identifying trusted adults who could help in crisis situations. We called it the Madison Protocol, and it was adopted by school districts across 3 states within 2 years. My mother learned about the foundation through news coverage that reached even her maximum security prison. She sent me a letter, the first communication I had received from her since her arrest. "You always were too clever for your own good," the letter said. "You think you have won something, but you have just made yourself a target. There are others like Richard and me, and now they know your name." I shared the letter with Detective Santos, who had become a mentor and friend over the years. She read it carefully, and then looked at me with something that might have been pride. "Are you afraid?" she asked. I considered the question seriously. "No," I said finally. "I am prepared, and I am not alone anymore." The letter from my mother turned out to be more prophetic than threatening. Within 6 months of the foundation's public launch, we started receiving contacts from other children who had recognized patterns similar to what I had experienced. Children whose parents were involved in suspicious relationships, whose family members had died in convenient accidents, whose guardians were making unexplained financial decisions. The volume of contacts was staggering and heartbreaking. Apparently, Black Widow criminals were far more common than anyone had realized, and their victims were often children who lacked the vocabulary or resources to report what they were witnessing. 15-year-old Marcus from Detroit called our hotline because his stepfather had started giving his mother vitamins that made her sick, just like Richard had done to Catherine. 12-year-old Sophie from Phoenix contacted us because her aunt, who had custody after her parents died, was planning to take her on a camping trip to a remote location eerily similar to the camping trip that had resulted in the disappearance of one of my mother's previous victims. Each case required careful investigation coordination with local authorities and strategic intervention. We developed protocols for emergency situations working closely with FBI agents who specialized in family-based crimes. Detective Santos had been promoted and now headed a federal task force dedicated to investigating networks of family predators. But our success also attracted unwanted attention. 3 months after my mother's warning letter, we discovered that someone had been conducting surveillance on the Foundation's offices. Security cameras caught images of the same man photographing our building on multiple occasions. When Detective Santos ran his identity, he turned out to be a private investigator hired by a law firm that represented several individuals we had investigated. They are trying to find weaknesses in our operations, Detective Santos explained during an emergency meeting with Catherine and my adoptive parents. Legal vulnerabilities, personal information about our staff, anything they can use to discredit our work or intimidate us into backing down. The law firm represented not just individuals we had investigated, but also family members of people currently in prison because of our work. They were building a coordinated legal challenge to our foundation, claiming we were operating outside proper legal channels and violating the rights of people we investigated. But their strategy backfired spectacularly. The legal challenge brought massive media attention to our work, resulting in national news coverage that highlighted both our successes and the broader problem of family-based predatory crimes. Instead of shutting us down, their attack amplified our message and brought in support from unexpected sources. Major law enforcement agencies began partnering with us officially. The FBI created a specialized unit for family predator crimes and asked me to serve as a consultant despite my young age. Child Protection Services in 12 states adopted our educational protocols. Most importantly, other survivors of family-based crimes started coming forward to share their stories and join our mission. Catherine's health continued to improve, but she made a decision that surprised everyone. She announced that she was donating her entire personal fortune to expand the Foundation's work, keeping only enough money to ensure her stepchildren's education and basic needs were met. Money was what made us targets, she explained. But money can also be what saves other families. I want every penny that Richard tried to steal to be used for protecting children and catching predators. Her donation allowed us to expand nationally. We opened offices in major cities, hired teams of investigators and legal experts, and created a 24-hour hotline for children in crisis situations. The Foundation became a legitimate force in child protection and criminal justice. But the most significant development came when we started connecting our individual cases and realized we had uncovered something much larger than isolated crimes. The patterns we were seeing suggested an organized network of predators who shared information techniques and even victims. My mother's prison communications were being monitored as part of her sentence. An analyst discovered that she had been corresponding with other incarcerated criminals, sharing advice about targeting families and evading detection. Richard had been doing the same thing. Together, they were running what amounted to a criminal education program from inside prison. Federal authorities used this evidence to build a massive racketeering case against dozens of individuals who had been connected through this network. The investigation revealed that family predator crimes were not random occurrences, but often part of coordinated schemes involving multiple criminals who specialized in different aspects of targeting and destroying families. The scope of the network was staggering. Over 200 suspicious deaths were linked to individuals who had been in contact with my mother and Richard. Millions of dollars in stolen assets were traced through complex financial networks designed to hide the proceeds of family-based crimes. My mother, who had thought she was just sharing war stories with fellow criminals, had inadvertently provided federal authorities with a roadmap to the largest family predator network in American history. The irony was perfect. Her attempt to mentor other criminals from prison had given law enforcement everything they needed to destroy the entire operation. Her pride in her criminal expertise had become the key to unraveling decades of unsolved crimes. As federal agents arrested members of the network across multiple states, I received another letter from my mother. This one was very different from her previous threatening message. "You have destroyed everything," the letter said. "Not just for me, but for dozens of people. You have no idea what you have unleashed." I read the letter to Catherine, David, Sarah, Emma, and my adoptive parents during one of our family dinners. We had started having these weekly gatherings to process the intensity of our work and maintain our connections to each other. "She is right about one thing," I said after finishing the letter. "I did unleash something. But what I unleashed was justice, accountability, and protection for families who deserve to be safe." Catherine raised her glass of iced tea in a mock toast to unleashing things that needed to be unleashed. We all raised our glasses, even little Emma, who was now 11 and had become fiercely protective of all the children who contacted our foundation for help. But our celebration was premature. The network's collapse had created a power vacuum, and new predators were already moving to fill the space left by those we had helped arrest. 5 years after my mother first abandoned me with $2 and a refrigerator full of rotting food, I stood in the federal courthouse watching the final sentencing hearing for the family predator network we had helped expose. 43 individuals received sentences ranging from 25 years to life in prison. The total value of assets recovered for victims' families exceeded $12 million. My mother was brought in shackles to hear additional charges filed against her for her role in coordinating the network from prison. She had aged dramatically during her incarceration, her hair now completely gray, her face gaunt from the stress of facing multiple life sentences. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before her additional sentencing, she stood and looked directly at me in the gallery. "My daughter destroyed my life," she said, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "Everything that has happened is because she could not mind her own business as a child." The judge responded immediately. "Ms. Patterson, your daughter saved lives. Your daughter prevented multiple murders, including potentially her own. Your daughter showed more courage and moral clarity as an 11-year-old than you have shown in your entire adult life. She did not destroy your life. She stopped you from destroying the lives of others." My mother was sentenced to an additional 30 years in prison, ensuring she would never be eligible for parole. As the bailiff led her away, she turned back one more time. "This is not over," she said, looking at me. I stood up in the gallery and spoke clearly enough for everyone in the courtroom to hear. "You are right. It is not over. It is just beginning." After the hearing, Detective Santos, who had become like an aunt to me over the years, walked with me to the courthouse steps where Catherine and my chosen family were waiting. "How are you feeling?" Detective Santos asked. I considered the question carefully. At 18, I had experienced things that most adults never face. I had built a national organization, helped solve dozens of crimes, and turned my mother's abandonment into a force for protecting other children. I had also graduated high school with honors and been accepted to several prestigious universities with full scholarships. "I feel like I understand what family really means now," I said finally. Catherine, who had become my mentor and chosen grandmother, wrapped me in a hug. David, Sarah, and Emma, who were now my siblings in every way that mattered, gathered around us. Maria and Carlos Martinez, who had given me the gift of unconditional parental love, stood nearby, beaming with pride. This was my real family, Not the woman who had given birth to me and then systematically planned my destruction, but the people who had chosen to love and support me through the most difficult circumstances imaginable. The Madison Foundation for Family Justice had evolved far beyond what any of us had originally envisioned. We now operated in 15 states, had helped solve over 200 cases, and had prevented countless crimes through our educational programs. More importantly, we had created a network of survivors who supported each other and worked together to protect vulnerable families. I had decided to attend college to study criminal justice and psychology, with plans to eventually attend law school. My goal was to become a prosecutor specializing in family-based crimes, combining my personal experience with formal legal training. But the foundation would continue its work whether I was directly involved or not. Catherine had established an endowment that would fund operations indefinitely. David was planning to study forensic accounting to help with financial investigations. Sarah wanted to become a social worker specializing in child protection. Emma, now 13, had already started developing educational materials for younger children based on her own experiences. We had built something that would outlast any individual involvement. We had turned our shared trauma into a legacy of protection for other families. The most satisfying development came 6 months after the final sentencing hearing, when I received a letter from a woman named Janet Morrison. Her 12-year-old daughter had used our educational materials to recognize dangerous patterns in her stepfather's behavior and had contacted our hotline before he could harm their family. "Your story taught my daughter that children have power and that adults will listen if they present evidence clearly," Janet wrote. "You saved my daughter's life by teaching her to save her own life." That letter sits framed on my desk at the Foundation's headquarters next to photos of Catherine's family. My adoptive family and the dozens of children who have contacted us over the years seeking help. People often ask me if I hate my mother for what she did to me. The question always surprises me because hatred seems like such a small emotion compared to what I actually feel. I feel grateful. Grateful that her cruelty taught me the difference between people who protect children and people who harm them. Grateful that her abandonment led me to build connections with people who became my real family. Grateful that her crimes gave me the opportunity to prevent other families from experiencing the same destruction. My mother thought she was creating a victim when she left me alone with $2. Instead, she created an advocate. She thought she was eliminating a problem when she planned my death. Instead, she inspired a movement. The last time I saw her was through prison glass during a visit I made on my 18th birthday. She looked older, smaller, defeated by years of incarceration and the knowledge that her crimes had been completely exposed. "Do you ever think about forgiving me?" she asked through the phone. I considered the question seriously before answering. Forgiveness is something you give to people who are sorry for what they did wrong. Are you sorry for trying to kill me? Or are you just sorry you got caught? She could not answer the question. When you can answer that question honestly, I told her, we can talk about forgiveness. I hung up the phone and walked away, knowing it would probably be the last conversation we would ever have. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced family betrayal that made you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty and love? What would you do if you discovered a family member was planning to harm you? Drop your thoughts in the comments because these situations are more common than people realize, and your perspective might help someone else recognize warning signs in their own life. If this story of family vengeance and justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that children have more power than adults sometimes realize. Subscribe for more real-life drama stories where karma comes full circle and justice gets served in the most unexpected ways. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey from abandonment to advocacy. Remember that family is not always about blood relations. Sometimes family is about the people who choose to protect you when your blood relatives choose to harm you. Keep fighting for justice. Keep protecting the vulnerable. And never underestimate the power of courage combined with careful planning.